What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have now Tropical Storm Beryl over the Yucatan Peninsula. It made landfall earlier this morning with winds of 110 miles per hour as a high-end Category 2 hurricane. It briefly re-strengthened to a Category 3 hurricane last night before making landfall as a high-end Category 2. Hurricane hunters were out there earlier this morning and late last night. Taking a look at this, we seem to have a pretty big fluctuation in intensity as it was approaching, and now it is over the Yucatan Peninsula. It's caused quite a bit of damage over there, although not as much as what we were initially anticipating, which is some good news, but it is staying near the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula, and long term that may not be a good thing, and we'll explain why in just a second. But before we do that, let's go ahead and get into the cliff notes of this right here and right there. Here's the situation. It is now a 70 mile per hour tropical storm. It is moving west-northwest at 15 miles per hour. It's been moving a lot slower than it has been. It was moving at 22, 23 miles per hour before. Now it's down to 15 miles per hour, and the cone expects this to reorganize and re-intensify into a hurricane as it approaches Texas right here. We've seen a lot of models start to uptrend further and further to the north before they were down to the U.S.-Mexico border. Then they were down to the extreme South Texas, and as we'll show you in just a second, now they're having this zeroing in around the Corpus Christi region, so we're going to have to pay attention to that right here. And we also are expecting this thing to really slow down quite a bit. This is going to be over water for 2.5 days as it reorganizes and re-intensifies into a hurricane, and maybe even a major hurricane as we're getting more information and more data down the road. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into the public advisory. Once again, winds are 70 miles per hour. Pressure is 986 millibars at this current point, and it's moving west-northwest at this current point in time. Tropical storm force winds extend outward 105 miles from the center, so we're going to have to pay attention to that right here and right then. We're also going to have to pay attention to when hurricane watches are issued for the coast of Texas, which I think are going to be issued later tonight. So we're going to have to pay attention to that. Here is the discussion that they have right here for the strengthening. It is expected to get up to 85 miles per hour according to the National Hurricane Center as it approaches Texas. I've been talking to my guys at Storms United, and all of us think that that is a bit of a conservative forecast because we're seeing a lot better conditions than what we were initially thinking 3 days ago in the Yucatan Peninsula, and considering that this is going to be moving further north than a lot of the models forecasted yesterday, it's going to be spending more time over water and more time in these favorable conditions to organize and intensify. So we're going to have to pay attention to that right here and right then. It's expected to emerge over the Gulf of as a tropical storm. It could take 12 to 24 hours for the core structure to recover over the Gulf of Mexico. I've been calling this for the last couple of days right here. Ever since this thing made landfall, and ever since before it made landfall, I knew that it would take a little bit to reorganize and re-intensify and all that. But based off of some of the radar I've been seeing recently that's been submitted to my guys at from Storms United, we are seeing the core actually looking better now than it was making landfall. Which again, this typically doesn't happen over land. You see the core start to collapse in and all that stuff. But we are seeing the core really start to reorganize over land, which we saw this again with Hurricane Ida in 2021. And so this isn't exactly unheard of, but the fact that we're seeing a lot more of an organized structure, even though the satellite imagery doesn't look that fantastic right now, that's a little scary to me, and I'm a little concerned that this could accelerate the process as it gets into 28 plus degrees Celsius waters in the Gulf of Mexico. So we're going to have to pay attention to that. We can go ahead and show you the global sea surface temperatures, where this thing is going to be moving through. It's going to exit off of the Yucatan Peninsula into 27 degrees Celsius, which is about 80, I believe 80, it's about 81 degrees Fahrenheit. I had to do the arithmetic in my head. And then it's going to be entering 28, then 29, and as it gets closer to the Texas coast, 30 degrees Celsius waters. That is 86 degrees Fahrenheit for those of you living in the United States, where this thing is going to be heading towards. This is a very serious situation we need to take into account, and this is why I am concerned that this thing could intensify a lot faster than I think a lot of people especially the NHC anticipates at this current point, although they have been uptrending the forecasts over the last day. Before, they were expecting a 75-mile-per-hour hurricane. They're expecting an 85-mile-per-hour hurricane, although a lot of the forecast models are going, hey, this is going to go a lot higher than we think, than the NHC think it is, and we're seeing all these models, and we're seeing all these conditions happening. We need to pay attention to this, and that's what I'm doing right here. Another thing to pay attention to is the ocean heat content over here. OHC is noticeably lower than it is in the Caribbean Sea. However, those warm sea surface temperatures definitely make up for that. And in some areas over here in the western Gulf of Mexico, we're seeing OHC values cracking 100 OHC, which is good for good, robust, rapid strengthening, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to have to pay attention to. There is a huge blob of 125 to 150 OHC over here. Personally, I don't think it's going to go that far east, and I don't think it's going to enter this area, which I believe is an eddy over here, to enter that. But it is something to pay attention to, and it's definitely something to pay attention to down the road, because I've said this like a broken record for about a week or so. These waters in the OHC have not cooled off. Beryl moved way too fast for it to really make a dent in the OHC or the sea surface temperatures. It might have cooled it off like maybe a little bit, but that's easily going to be made up as we get into later into July, and then to early August, and then to early September, as we continue to see those waters recover, and as we continue to see just this whole OHC blob get a lot larger, and this whole 30 degrees Celsius blob get a lot larger, possibly Atlantic wide in a lot of these regions. It's definitely going to encompass the vast majority of the Gulf. It's absolutely going to encompass the vast majority of the Caribbean Sea, and it's definitely, most certainly going to encompass some areas in the Atlantic Basin, especially around the Bahamas and the northern coast of Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico, and maybe even the western ocean, main development region could see those extremely warm waters that we're talking about. I mean, they already are at this current point. It's just something we're going to have to pay attention to down the road. If we go ahead and show you the wind shear, the wind shear is a lot less than we thought it would be. Now, there is this huge pocket of quote-unquote wind shear, but that can be attributed to the hurricane and the outflow of the storm. So overall, I'm not too worried about this thing, because this is most likely part of the storm right here. But what I am concerned is the area to the west of it. There's only 20 knots of wind shear, ladies and gentlemen. We were expecting 30 to 40 knots of wind shear a couple of days ago. Part of the reason of this is because the tropical upper tropospheric trough that's in that region is moving out a lot faster than a lot of people anticipated. And now we're seeing, instead of 30 to 40 knots over here than what we were seeing a couple days ago, now we're seeing only 20 knots. And that could go down even further to maybe around 15 or so, which would be really good for tropical strengthening, ladies and gentlemen. And this is why I am so concerned. Now, there is one inhibiting factor, unlike all the other times. There is a lot of dry air in the western Gulf of Mexico, but the only way that could intrude, really affect it, is if the wind shear allows it for it to intrude the core. Like I said before, the core has been rebuilding even as it was moving through the Yucatan Peninsula. So that could definitely speed up the process of this thing organizing and intensifying. If dry air does get in there, this now has a much better chance of fighting it off and intensifying at a quicker rate. Now, there is a few pockets of moist air around the western Gulf of Mexico over here, but it's mainly surrounded by dry air. And what we see in the next 12 to 24 hours will make or break this system, in my opinion. I still think this is going to be a hurricane, but the question of how strong it's going to be as it gets to the Texas coast, will be kind of decided in the next 12 to 24 hours. Because if this comes off the Yucatan and we start seeing strengthening right off the bat, and we start seeing a bunch of convection flares right off the bat, it's go time with this. And if we start to see a bit of a slower pace of this and then start to intensify, there's still a very large possibility this could get very strong. So this is just stuff I need to warn you guys about at this current point in time. Now, let's go ahead and show you the track models and the intensity. The track models scare me a lot, because here's what we were looking at 12Z earlier today. A lot of the 12Z models had this thing making landfall in South Texas near Brownsville. This was issued at 7 o'clock my time this morning, 7 o'clock Texas time this morning, that we're both in the same time zone. And the models had this thing sitting over water for about 2.5 days or so, which that hasn't changed too much. But looking at the 18Z, they have shifted a lot further to the east and a lot further to the north. And instead of maybe Brownsville now, this thing is going to be impacting the Corpus Christi area. And what that's going to do is that is going to allow for it to stay over water longer and allow for this thing to organize and intensify longer. That's not good, ladies and gentlemen, especially if you're on the Texas coast. And another thing that scares me about this track, and I don't want to scare anyone from Texas by saying this, but this track reminds me a lot of Hurricane Harvey. Yeah, I just said it. This track reminds me a lot of Harvey. Now, is it going to be a Harvey-esque storm? Absolutely not. It's not going to stall over Houston or anything like that. It's going to be pushed out through land, through much of Texas, much of Arkansas, into the Midwest as a remnant low. There's no Colorado high blocking it this time around. That's not going to happen. But if you remember what Harvey did before it hit Houston, where it went from an open wave to a Category 4 hurricane in the span of 2 days, with similar conditions to what we're seeing now, we had lower than expected wind shear, we had very warm waters, although the waters in August of 2017 were a bit warmer than this. We're still not too off the cuff. OHC was definitely a little bit larger, but not that much. That's what's scaring me with this. Now, granted, there are some factors that we have to consider. The wind shear could pick up at any time. Even though it is weaker now, it could definitely pick up down the road unexpectedly. We've seen that with hurricanes before. Intensity models are kind of all over the place. Let me go ahead and show you the 12Z intensity models with this right here. Here's what we were seeing at 12Z. We were seeing the vast majority of these models strengthening up back up to hurricane strength and everything like that. Now, if we go ahead and show you that, they're down to tropical storm strength. It's going to be fluctuating up, down, up, down, up, down. But a lot of my guys at Storms United are telling me, hey, Patrick, this thing could quickly organize and intensify. Hey, Patrick, the models are being a little conservative right now given the conditions. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to mainly be nowcasting this. What nowcasting a tropical system means, I'm watching what it does now, and I'm going to be watching what it does as it gets into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, there's not going to be a live stream tonight or anything like that. Unfortunately, there's probably not going to be one tomorrow either. I'll give it my best tomorrow, but tonight there's not going to be a live stream. I have to work until 10 o'clock my time, and by that point, it's going to be way too late. Everyone's going to want to go to bed and everything like that. But tomorrow, I'll see what I can do with that, depending on what happens. But yeah, we're looking at a pretty interesting situation coming up. I've been rambling on for quite a while right now, so let's go ahead and go to the shear and the moisture forecast, which I have pulled up courtesy of the European. We're going to use the 6Z of the European since it's only 90 hours out, and that's all we really need at this point. It's also the most recent at this current point. So let's go ahead and show you that what we have right here. Wind shear is going to be, in theory, according to this model, going to pick up. But this is likely attributed to the outflow right here. This is likely attributed to the storm itself, so I wouldn't be paying too much attention to this. And what I'm looking at is the map right here, right then. Definitely seeing a weakening of the wind shear at this current point in time. So here's what we have. A lot of this can be attributed to the outflow of this system. And then I'm starting to notice something with the shear. You're starting to notice the outflow of it kind of gets caught in a little bit to a lot of this big wind shear bulk over here across much of the United States. Pay attention to Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama right here, because if that inflow gets caught into all that shear right there, that's definitely going to help the ventilation and definitely going to help with strengthening and intensification. And you start to see that wind shear really drop off in that last 24 hours. So depending on what happens is going to depend on how quickly this strengthens, at least shear-wise. Moisture component to all this, let's go ahead and show you that. There is a lot more dry air, like I've said, in the Gulf of Mexico compared to what we were seeing earlier. But based off of some of the radar images we were seeing, I'm going to see if I can pull that up, some of those images up here on in the Tropical WX discussion here at Storms United. I'll take a look at, I'll see if I can pull it up very quickly. Oh, yeah, here's what we are looking at right here. This is the current radar based from Cancun. you're starting to see that structure really start to reorganize. You're starting to see notice this thing starting to wrap around the edge again. It was very messy when it made landfall, but now that we're starting to see the core start to reorganize already over the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula, pay attention to this, and we'll definitely have a lot more radar shots in the next few days as the Texas radars start to get into range of this. But we'll pay attention to that. There is going to be some dry air intruding to this, and by the time it gets to about, I'd say, 30 hours before landfall, dry air is not going to be a problem anymore as the storm rebuilds its core, and the storm has a pretty big moisture plume across a lot of the region right there. So overall, we're going to have to pay attention to that. And wind shear and dry air are going to be a few limiting factors this time around, especially in those first 24 hours. But expect the unexpected with Beryl. We've seen it all around. We've seen it in the Caribbean become a Cat 5. We saw it hit Jamaica as a very strong Cat 4. We saw it hit the Lesser Antilles as a strong Cat 4. And we saw this hitting the Yucatan Peninsula as a strong Cat 2. So expect the unexpected, ladies and gentlemen, for better or for worse. Now let's go ahead and quickly pull up the hurricane models just to kind of show you what's going on. We're going to go ahead and start with the HMON. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to use is the 10-meter winds. The HMON has this thing starting to slowly organize and develop as it gets off the Yucatan Peninsula. Again, it's probably going to take 12 to 24 hours for it to reorganize, but then it starts to re-strengthen, starts to re-intensify, gets up to low-end Category 2 strength as it makes landfall near Corpus Christi, and then weakens, obviously, due to land interaction at this current point in time. But you notice, especially in those last 30 hours, this thing really started to take full advantage of the conditions it's given to it. And that scares me a lot because we've all seen it rapidly intensifying storms take full advantage of the conditions it's given to it. Here's the HWARF A model starting to kind of organize. It takes a while longer for this thing to organize, and I'm guessing there's a bit of a dry air intrusion. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at this. Yeah, there's quite a bit of dry air that's going into this right there, and this was initialized at 7 o'clock in the morning, and things obviously have changed given this radar image. It was taken, I believe, around 10 o'clock this morning, if I remember correctly, so we're going to have to pay attention to this. HWARF A doesn't really have much happening, mainly due to the dry air, so there is going to be a lot more uncertainty going forward, at least when it comes to this stuff right here. Here's what we have with HWARF B right here. Having this thing moving through the Yucatan starts to slowly organize and develop, similar to what the HWARF A is doing. Takes a little while, but then it takes a lot of advantage of the conditions it's given, and then it makes landfall as a mid-range Category 1 hurricane according to the models. But I do think the models may be a little bit conservative given that they haven't fully caught up to the fact of what we're seeing with radar, and that's why I've said we need to now cast it. Now let's go ahead and show you the HWARF. Now, credit to the HWARF. This thing has been really right on with Beryl since the very beginning. I am going to be using it, but I would take it with a grain of salt because it has this thing organizing and intensifying pretty quickly after the core starts to rebuild itself. Then it starts to intensify, and it gets up to Category 2 strength, mid-range Category 2 strength as it approaches the Corpus Christi region, makes landfall and causes a lot of impacts over there, weakens due to land interaction, and that's pretty much the last we will hear of that from the HWARF model at this current point. Out of curiosity, I want to go ahead and see what the GFS is thinking about this right here. Let's go ahead and see what the GFS is showing right here. Organization development. The GFS has this thing struggling due to dry air intrusion, so it's going to be making and it's kind of what I've been saying before. The next 24 hours is going to make or break this tropical cyclone right here, and let's go ahead and see. And just for craps and giggles, I want to go ahead and see what the icon is doing with this, just to pique my curiosity with this. Let's go ahead and see what the icon model is doing with this. Having this thing quickly start to reorganize and intensify pretty fast. It actually, according to the 12Z icon, wants this thing to make landfall around the Houston area, which, again, that is unlikely at this current point. The most probable point, unless this thing shifts even further to the east, is Corpus Christi. But the icon really wants this thing to make landfall in the Houston area. Again, the icon is iconic for being much further north than the rest of the models. It has a bit of a northward bias to it. So we're going to have to pay attention to that as we get more information and more data to come forward. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Remember, we are trying to get to 10,000 subscribers before or on July 17th, my 21st birthday. So be sure to subscribe to the channel if you are new. It helps me out, helps me make more videos like these. ladies. The goal of this channel, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. And if you want to come see the behind the scenes of what's going on in the chats, be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. Link to that is right over there. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.